The sign was louder than the wind, and I knew if I touched that rope, I'd start a war. Red paint, crooked letters, "Don't forgive." The words bled down the crude plank like the desert itself had carved them. I eased my Dunmare through the cottonwoods with the kind of slowness a man uses when he wants to pretend he has a choice. The air smelled of hot sap and old dust. Birds had the sense to be quiet. What I'd heard a minute back, that raw, wrong little whimper, came again, thin as thread pulled across a blade. She hung by the wrists, toes brushing earth, skin the color of the sun's patience, hair matted with sweat and grit, lips split. The rope was twisted mesquite fiber, more cruel than hemp, made by a hand that believed pain should teach. Whoever tied it meant her to suffer, to be seen, to be a lesson. If I cut her down, I'd be choosing a side. If I rode away, I'd be the man I have been hiding from since last spring, the one who heard his sister screaming in the barn and still took one more breath before running, one more beat too long. Between that breath and the next, a life can fall through a man and never stop falling. On the ridge above the flats, something blinked. Sun on glass, rifle maybe too. The day had turned its shoulder. By sundown, dust-hollow men would ride the fence line with gossip and law stitched to the same ugly jacket. A $50 poster can turn a neighbor into a hunter. Mercy costs more than that. Easy, I told a stranger who had not asked for words. My own voice sounded like someone else trying to be kind. Her eyes opened, slow, two dark coals nursing a stubborn heat. She didn't beg, she didn't look away. She watched me measure the rope, watched my hand rise to the knife on my belt, watched me meet the piece of me that always wanted to hesitate. The knife felt heavier than it ever had. Steel held a reflection of my jaw, hard and wrong. I slid the point under the twist, careful to keep my body between her and the ridge. If they were watching, they'd see a rancher adjusting a knot, not a man coming down on the side of trouble. In that breath, memory cut me first. The barn is smoke and screaming. The yard is spinning. I am fast, but fear is faster. And I am late, and I am late, and I am late. My sister's voice shears into silence and leaves nothing but a hole where a man's courage should live. "Not today," the blade whispered. The rope sighed. Her weight fell and I caught it against my chest. Hot. Fever, hot. Light in some ways. Heavy in others. Her wrists slipped free and the skin at the cuts looked like angry mouths. She made a sound like a creek waking up after 10 months of drought. I kicked the severed length of rope back into the brush, cut the second lashing, tore the sign off the nail in the trunk, and shoved it into my saddlebag face down. The cottonwood leaves trembled, telling secrets. If shots were coming, they didn't. Maybe the watchers wanted to see what mercy looked like up close. Maybe they weren't there. The desert has a way of making a man argue with ghosts until he's tired enough to follow any voice that promises sleep. "Water," I said. I wet a cloth from my canteen, touched it to her mouth. She drank in little gasps that sounded like they hurt. I draped my coat around her shoulders, the old brown one with both elbows patched. She let me. Trust isn't always a handshake. Sometimes it's just the absence of a flinch. "Name?" I asked. "Because names are the first bridge we build and the first we burn." Her tongue moved. No sound. Her eyes flicked toward the ridge. Mine did not follow. I had already looked up too many times in my life and not enough when it mattered. "Lena," I said. Not because I believed it, but because a person needs something to answer to, while the truth heals enough to stand. "Just for now." I lifted her onto the mare, swung up behind, and turned toward home. The horse felt the fear on me, the hurry I kept caged. I let the reins lie easy and leaned her against my chest so she wouldn't bounce. The road cut through low juniper and pale stone, past the arroyo that eats cattle in flash floods and the fence I never finished because grief makes men start things and not end them. We cleared the cottonwoods, and the wind returned like it owned the place. Maybe the ridge had been empty all along. Maybe the world had decided to give me one last quiet mile. The sky went big and white, and heat reached inside my shirt like a hand. "Don't sleep," I told her, because the way her head lolled scared me worse than bullets. She answered with the smallest sound. It said, "I'm still here." My ranch isn't much. A one-room house with a loft that keeps heat in winter and in summer too, which is a joke the land likes to tell. A barn that leans like a man at prayer. A windmill that sings the same 2 notes all afternoon. I pulled up by the porch, slid off, and caught her again. the way a blacksmith catches a chain when it swings back heavy. Inside, the light is kind. The table is scarred. The cot is a fair liar about comfort. I laid her down and cut away the rope from her wrists where fibers clung like burrs. I heated water and set it near her feet, and my hands knew what to do, even if my head didn't know why I was the one doing it. "I ain't gonna hurt you," I said. It's a sentence men say when they wish another man had said it sooner. Her eyes stayed on me, not soft, not hard. Waiting, I took her right foot, slid it into the basin, and washed the dust and blood away. She flinched once, like a bird remembering a different sky, and then kept still. The water clouded rust and clay, and the kind of red that doesn't wash out of wood if you let it sit too long. I wrapped her feet in what clean cloth I had and set them on a folded blanket like they deserved a gentler earth. Outside, coyotes tossed the dark between them. I set beans and watered flour on the stove, something warm to anchor the room. I took my bedroll to the barn because a house grows smaller when one person is scared and the other is guilty. As I stepped back onto the porch, I turned and looked at her one more time. The lamplight cut her face into planes and shadow. She watched me like a man watches a river after 12 months of dust. Not trust, not yet. Something like its first idea. I emptied the basin outside and watched the water sink into thirsty ground. Tomorrow the wind would erase the mark. Tonight, for a minute, it made a dark mouth in the dirt that looked like it could swallow what we had done. By the time I stretched out on the barn floor with my rifle within reach and the hay like 1,000 needles under my shoulder blades, the sign in my saddlebag had started talking again, even with its red face turned to wood. "Don't forgive!" I let the sentence sit on my chest until sleep carried it off and set it in a place where things can't follow. Sleep didn't stay. Boots woke me, mine at first, then not mine. The kind of sound a lawman makes when he wants to step like a neighbor. Dawn didn't own the sky yet, but it had a claim. I sat up and slid the rifle into my hands. The metal was cool. The barn door cracked light like an egg. "Morning," a voice called, polite as a sermon and just as dangerous. "House belonged to Mr. Wyatt?" I stood, rolling that name in my mouth like I hadn't said it in weeks. It tasted like a man I might have been if I were better at choosing quickly. I stepped out and squinted against a light that hadn't finished being born. "Yes, sir," I said. "It does." The man on the chestnut wore blue and dust and a face that believed in paper more than people. He tipped his hat like we were about to make a deal. "Lieutenant Graham," he said. "Dust Hollow Station." And I knew Mercy had sent for company. A folded notice can hang you faster than any rope. Lieutenant Graham pulled a paper from his breast pocket with the care of a man presenting a relic. He didn't ask to come inside because he assumed the whole world already was. "Tracking a fugitive," he said, and handed me the notice before he finished spelling my name. Wanted was big as a headline. The sketch looked like a rumor that had learned how to draw. A young Apache woman with long hair and eyes that would have been sharper if the artist had ever met her. Murder. Escape. $50 reward. Dangerous. The words did what the sign tried to do. Decide everything ahead of time. "You seen her?" he asked, reins loose in his fingers. Like the horse and I were both under his training. "Can't say I have." The lie came in even, same temperature as morning. Lying isn't hard if you tell yourself you're correcting someone else's mistake. He let his gaze do a slow walk across the yard. The windmill, the sagging barn, the porch where my boots had written the truth into dust, then brought it back to my face. He didn't look at the window. He didn't have to. Men like him believe. Windows report to them anyway. "She's not just a runaway, Mr. Wyatt. Savages like her leave messages." He didn't say which message. He didn't need to. The word savages did all the heavy lifting he'd brought it for. "I keep to myself," I said. "Only messages I get are bills." The joke fell flat between us. Humor needs a table to land on. We were standing in a yard. "If you see anyone, you'll send word." "If I see anyone, I'll send word," I said back. Because sometimes the only way to end a conversation is to repeat it until it dies of boredom. He studied me a second longer, then tipped his hat and turned his horse, with a pressure of calf and a small idea of grace. The dust lifted, thought about settling, and chose not to. I watched the trail until it stopped pretending to be a line. Inside, the curtain stirred. I knew before I stepped through that Ayana had heard every word. You can always tell when a room has been listening. It remembers what it was supposed to forget. She sat on the cot with the blanket tight around her shoulders, the way a person wears a door when a house doesn't have one. Her eyes were sharper than the drawing, and the sketch artist would have been a better man if he'd seen them first. They came looking, I said, hanging my hat on the nail that never holds on the first try. Showed me a poster, said you were wanted. Her fingers tightened and then let go, as if she had been holding a rope only she could see. I told them no. I didn't dress the words up. Sometimes you lose truth in lace. She searched me like she'd been trained to find the weak board in a fence. Then she nodded. A small thing, not agreement, not thanks. Just the closing of a door that had swung too long in wind. I put coffee on. The beans on the stove were willing to forgive another hour of heat. We ate without talking. Food is a bridge when words keep falling into the river. After, I set about the small morning chores that pretend life is ordinary. Pumping water, checking the gate hinge that always leans, easing the stubborn mule toward feed with lies and promises. Every few minutes, my eyes wandered to the line where the yard becomes everywhere else, as if I'd see the idea of a posse before the horses that carry it. By noon, the day had put its hand on my neck. Heat narrowed the world. In that thin place, I found the boot print, fresh as a confession. Not mine, not my size, heel-worn in a way cavalry wears heels, hard and a little proud. The print faced the barn faced my house, the house faced whatever was coming. I knelt and put my fingers beside the tracks, the way a man with a different life might set a prayer down and hope to pick up an answer. Back inside, Ayana sat at the window, the blanket a memory on her shoulders now instead of armor. The lamplight wasn't needed, but I lit it anyway. Light changes a room's mind about itself. You seen anyone? I asked. She shook her head without taking her eyes off the yard. Sometimes the truth is too dangerous for spoken language. It needs to travel in smaller shapes. Then we plan like we did, I said. Quiet, careful, nothing out of place. She stood, slow, steady, on wrapped feet that had found a truce with pain. She set the blanket aside and took 2 steps toward the door. My hand twitched, stupid habit of stopping what doesn't need stopping. I pulled it back. She opened the door and stepped into sun like it was a country she'd been denied a passport to. I watched from the threshold as she walked the yard. The ground in front of the barn is bare, swept by wind and hooves until nothing soft survives. She knelt and began to draw with a stick, lines scratching a story into dust. I went careful. In the earth, a bird rose, wings thrown wide, a circle of flame around it like a crown suffering itself. The lines weren't pretty. They weren't meant to be. They were faithful. What's that? I asked, keeping my voice behind her shoulder so she could choose whether to turn. Bird and fire, she said. The words were rough but whole. My people's sign, my father's mark. We paint it on tents, carve it on boughs. Fire means alive, bird means free. She tapped the center. They came, bluecoats, town rifles, said move to dry place. No water, no food, we say no, we stay, we fight, they burn. Mother, brothers, old ones. She swallowed. They say I steal a rifle. I don't. They tie me, hang me for bait. For who? For the rest who still breathe. Truth has a temperature. The air got colder in full sun. I wanted to reach for her and did not. A man can't take grief out of someone else's hands like it's an axe he knows the weight of. I believe you, I said. She looked at me the way people look at water after being told too many times it doesn't exist. She dropped the stick. Her shoulders shook, no sound. When the sobs came, they came clean, and the desert learned how to listen. I pressed my palm into the dirt beside the drawing, fingers splayed. Not touching her, touching what she gave to the ground. When the sky decided to be afternoon, she lifted her head. The firebird looked back at us, burning and calm. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, left a mark like war paint. You can call me Ayana, she said, voice steady now, river name returning to its bed. All right, I said. Ayana. The wind got busy again and rose some dust from the yard. In it, 3 riders lifted and fell in the far shimmer, not cavalry blue, canvas coats, hats that looked borrowed from better men. Joe Prescott rides like his horse owes him money. I felt my jaw set before I told it to. They didn't hurry. Men who believe they're welcome never do. I leaned my rifle against the porch post and let my hands hang empty. Ayana moved back into the house without the look that asks permission. She didn't need my nod to claim safety. I watched the riders close the last distance between us and felt the old barn straighten as if it knew when to stop sagging. Wyatt! Prescott called, swinging off his bay and hitting the ground like a man stomping a bug that isn't there. The tin star on his vest caught light and pretended it could convince someone. Heard tell you're harboring someone don't belong. You hear a lot of things, Joe, I said. Don't make them true. A girl, he said. Apache, there's a reward. $50 and the thanks of every God-fearing man west of anything that matters. You come all this way for a rumor. He spat into my dust. We aim to check inside just in case. You got a warrant? The question tasted like the last time you try the door before you put your shoulder into it. He laughed. The other two shifted in their saddles and looked at each other like the punchline had permission to be a bullet. You think this is a court, Wyatt? I think this is my house. I stepped off the porch to make the yard choose a side. I'm the only one lives here, ain't no girl. Just ghosts and goats. We stared at each other long enough for the wind to get bored. He touched the brim of his hat in a way that felt like he was touching my cheek. If you're lying, you'll burn with her. He swung up. The three of them turned and rode slow, like leaving was generosity. I didn't breathe until the dust folded back into the road. Inside, the lamplight flickered like it had been running. That night, I dug up the sign from the place I had shoved it face down. Wood remembers what it says even when it can't see itself. I carried it to the pit behind the barn, laid it like a body, and struck a match. The flame took in its own time, then bit hard and fast, letters curling into black tongues and then nothing but embers. I stood with my hands at my sides, palms open, like I had promised something, and was waiting to see if the world noticed. Footsteps came soft, learned from fear. Ayana stood at my elbow in my old coat, sleeves rolled twice, hair braided back the way people braid before sleep or war. She didn't speak. The fire wrote on both our faces. I should have burned it sooner, I said. She moved closer until her shoulder touched my arm. Heat and a kind of permission passed between us. Thank you, she said, and it wasn't a small word. The sign went down to coals. The wind settled. For the first time since the cottonwoods, I felt a silence that didn't want to hurt anybody. The morning held its breath like a man about to lie. I woke before light and did the kind of work a man does when he's trying to outrun thinking. Swept the porch, mended the latch, checked the fence that always threatens to divorce the post that loves it. Ayana slept with one hand open on the blanket, palm up, as if she had laid down an argument and would pick it up again when she woke. I left coffee on and step-counted the yard until the sun finally decided to arrive. By midday, we had a plan without saying we did. If Dust Hollow brought more men, we'd ride south at dark. I'd cached enough jerky, biscuits, and water to learn how heavy fear feels when it's slung over a saddle. The Sierra Madre sits in stories, like a promise nobody can collect on. Still, men and women run toward mountains when they've run out of everything else. I didn't know if Ayana believed in them. I didn't ask. A plan is easier to carry than a conversation. She moved easier that day, bare feet testing dirt with more certainty, wrists wrapped in clean cloth that made her look both wounded and ceremonial. She swept the floor, fed the chickens 2 at a time, same handful, as if fairness was food. She laughed once, surprised at herself, when the mule refused hay, as if insulted by its smell. I wanted to grab the sound and put it somewhere safe. Laughter in a place like ours is an animal that spooks easy. Near afternoon, I found her by the window, eyes narrowed, the way a tracker narrows at a print. They watch from ridge, she said. Last night. I feel it. She tapped her chest. Here, I nodded. They'll come on land, not from the bluecoats first. Prescott wants money more than a clean story. I set the rifle on the table and opened the box where I keep more truth than I admit. Spare cartridges, a map with the borderline drawn wrong because nobody agrees which river bend counts, a small tin of grease that makes a dry gun forget its age. She watched my hands and then my face. If they come, she said, you run with me, not for me, with, I said. There are vows you don't need paper for. Sundown found us on the porch. The sky pulled on its best colors and then decided to wear none of them, like a woman too tired to dress for company. The wind quit. Coyotes swallowed their voices. I could hear the windmill sulking, the dry grass rearranging itself. Ayana's breath 3 steps behind mine. I sharpened my knife because the sound is steady and because steel in hand reminds a man he can still act. The strokes made a small music that filled the emptiness without promising anything. Footsteps again, softer than men with confidence, harder than children playing at soldiers. I looked up without haste. Ayana had already moved. She stood in the doorway with the blanket over her shoulders like a yoke she'd decided to carry on her own terms. I set the stone down and let the knife lie flat, a gesture I hoped read as, "I don't want it to be this kind. One rider this time. Chestnut again, but not Graham." This coat was blue, yes, but tired, with threadbare cuffs and a collar the sun had punished. The man sat high, like a person who believed a horse lifted him closer to God. He reined in and touched 2 fingers to his hat brim like we were in church. We weren't. "Afternoon," he said. "Lieutenant Graham," and paused, as if the name were a test we could both fail. "We're tracking your kindness, Mr. Wyatt." I didn't flinch. Kindness has a hard time leaving tracks. He nodded, as if I'd made a point for him. He pulled another paper, same sketch, same lie, dressed like law. "This girl is wanted for murder. We have testimony." "From who?" He didn't blink. "From the man who found his wife cut and blamed the ones who threatened him earlier. From townsmen who saw smoke and heard whoops and decided what smoke and whoops always mean. From a private who swears her hands meant to steal a rifle because she held a knife when they pulled her from a tree." "Sometimes a knife is a thing you cut a rope with," I said. He looked at my hands. He saw the callus where rope and reins make their home. "Sometimes," he said. "Sometimes not." Ayana stood silent, a shadow with heat. I didn't look back at her because I didn't want Graham to read anything in the space between us that he could ride in with. "You seen her?" he asked again. "I've seen a lot of people," I said. "A lot of grief, not much justice." "Justice is a town thing," he said. "We do what we can. The rest is wind." He folded the paper. "If you see her, you'll send word." "We've done this dance," I said. "I'll send word." He turned the chestnut, and the horse did the rest. He didn't ride the direction he came. He rode toward the ridge. That told me which uniform he wears at night. When the dust settled this time, it settled cold. I went inside. Ayana remained at the threshold like a cat measuring weather. "They will not stop," she said. "No," I said, "because there is dignity in not lying when it would be so easy." We ate in quiet, beans and cornbread, and the dregs of coffee you can cut with a knife. After, I banked the fire so it could remember warmth without wasting it. I unrolled my bed by the door inside the house this time. Distance is respect until it becomes abandonment. I wouldn't sleep in the barn while the ridge learned our breathing. She didn't go to the cot. She stood by the table, fingers tracing the groove a spilt nail had left years ago. "Tell me truth," she said. "All." I sat. Chairs changed the tone of a confession. I told her about last spring, how men with painted faces and horses I did not recognize hit our fence line at a run. How everybody's story said Apache, because Apache was a word that covered a lot of other words. Starvation, rage, debt, revenge. How I had been out hunting a stray when the smoke wrote our name over the hills. How I ran back and heard my sister in the barn, and how fear reached me first and put its hand on my chest and told me to wait. How waiting is a thing a man can never forgive in himself if someone he loves dies while he does it. "You saved me because you could not save her," Ayana said. "Not unkind. I saved you because you were dying in front of me. I let the second truth walk behind the first. And because I don't want to be the man I was." She came around the table and stood, close enough that I could see where sand had stuck in her lashes and where the sun had had its way across her cheekbones. She lifted my hand and set my palm against her face like it was a place my hand belonged. "I don't love skin," I said, and the sentence surprised me. "I love what breathes under it." She leaned forward, and the world tilted. The kiss was a small shelter we built together, and then tried not to need too much. The fire sounded louder. The wind forgot our name. When we stepped back, the room didn't go back to what it had been. Rooms don't. We slept in shifts I didn't assign. Around midnight, I woke to her by the window, watching the ridge, the blanket around her shoulders like a flag no nation had invented yet. I listened to the kind of silence that sits with you, not on you. The knife lay on the table. The rifle leaned by the door. Mercy slept with its boots on. At first light, smoke rose in a straight line from the east, too steady to be a campfire. Men gathering are worse than weather because you can't outweight them. I strapped the bedrolls onto saddles and checked the canteens without pretending it was a drill. I put extra rounds in my pocket and the map where I could touch it without looking. Ayana watched me and then looked south, the way a person stands on the shoreline of a story and decides whether to swim. There is a place, she said. My mother's cousin said once. Sierra. Tall. Hard. Our people breathe there still. We'll ride tonight, I said. Under moon if it shows, under dark if it doesn't. She nodded. I want to live. She lifted her chin. I want to live as your wife. The word wife in that room felt like water in a well that had been rock for years. I let it fill places I didn't know were still empty. All right, I said, and felt something inside me sign a thing it had been riding toward for days. By sundown, the horses were saddled, the house was a memory waiting to happen, and the wind had taken pity on us long enough to rest. We left the door unlocked because no door in this territory can stop the thing that wants in. We rode west first for the stubborn mule's sake, then hooked south along the dry arroyos and the fence lines nobody mended this season. The stars held their breath until the moon remembered the road. 10 miles from a border nobody agrees on, the land opened into scrub and stone like a mouth unclenching. I rode point. Ayana rode just off my hip. Every shadow felt armed. Every breeze carried rumor. The shot came from the right, the kind of crack a rifle makes when it knows you already. Fire lanced my side. The saddle jumped and I spilled, dirt in my mouth, a taste I remembered from being a boy and learning to fall. Calder! She screamed, and the sound put strength into places my blood was leaving. Keep going! I rasped, lying like a man who doesn't know how to give a good order. No! Another shot. Rock spat behind us. 2 shapes on the ridge resolved into men who had chosen to be something worse. I pushed up. The world leaned. She hooked her arm under my shoulder and made my legs remember their job. We stumbled for the crease in the rocks I'd hoped was there. Bullets tore noise in the night, and the night stitched it closed. The pass took us when the riders would not. Inside the narrow, cool throat of stone, I collapsed to my knees and left a dark mark on lighter earth. Ayana pressed me against the wall and put her palm on my face like a blessing she had a right to give. You said wife, I told her, smiling wrong with pain. I meant it, she said. Then we'd better make it through, I said, and the pass agreed to keep our secret a little longer. The pass had a heartbeat, slow and deep, stone remembering the ocean it used to be. We waited there until the dark had fully learned our shape. I bled into a rag that had been a shirt once and into the dirt that had been altar all day. Ayana listened with her whole body the way hunted people do, head tilted, breath held, fingers on the rock as if the stone would speak first. The riders circled outside, their curses coming thin and mean. A bullet pinged off a ledge and sang a note that used to be a lullaby in a different life. Then the hoofbeats moved away. Men don't like tight places unless their fear is narrower than the gap they're being asked to pass. She set a small fire, no one could see from the mouth, and boiled water in a tin that had learned every dent of my hand. The smell of clean steam felt like permission. She tore cloth with her teeth and hands, wiped the blood from my side, and stitched the wound closed with a needle I carried for leather. She sewed like a person who had been taught to fix what the world tears. I bit down on a strip of wood and watched a map on the cave wall where I had never been. Tell me something true, I said, when the pain shrank enough to let words walk through it. She rinsed the needle, set it down, and took my hand. She guided it to the left of her breast, to the place where a person keeps their rhythm. Ayana, she said. My real name, it means peaceful river. Ayana, I repeated, and the stone set it back inside itself. You are the only peace I've ever known. She didn't cry this time. She pressed my hand harder against her chest, and I felt the drum that had kept her alive in trees and dust and fire and silence. I had another name, too, she said softer. The priest gave it, for trading in town, for talking with white wives when we sell moccasins. Elena? She smiled without humor. You chose close. Lucky, I said. No, she said, and the word set a small light in the air. You listen. The fire went to coals and then to a glow that could be a story if it had an ending. I slept a little and woke a little, and learned the names of 3 rocks I had never met before. At dawn, the pass did the thing it does where it tells the light how to enter. The mouth breathed cool air onto our faces. My fever had climbed and then come down, a traveler with manners. We moved before day had the courage to be itself. The ridge was quiet, which is to say it was dangerous in a different way. The horses had spent the night under a lip of stone where they learned to be shadows. We saddled without talking much. Ayana put my hand on the pommel and my foot in the stirrup and made sure pride didn't get a vote. We rode in the groove of the rocks until the groove became 2, then 3, then fence-torn flats that have seen more arguments than crops. At a dry wash, we stopped long enough to drink what we had and let the animals pull careful on their own share. Ayana stood on the bank and looked south, eyes narrowed against the far line that has always lied to men who need it to be true. "They will not chase long," she said. "They will wait. Poster money will still be there next week." "Prescott wants to be the man who brings a body to town and a story to the saloon," I said. "Graham wants the paper to be right." She glanced at me. "And you?" "I want a house where the wind doesn't know my name." I shrugged and winced. "And you breathing in it." She smiled then, first unguarded one I had seen, and it put a crack in my fear big enough for light. "You speak like priest sometimes," she said, teasing soft. "Then you speak like horseman again." "Both know something about stubborn," I said. We moved on. The day heated and forgot us. In the afternoon, we found water that did not smell like rust or dead things. Real water, under cottonwood shade, deep enough to make a sound when it decided which way to go. Ayana made camp with economy, fire under a rock shelf, bedrolls where the wind would pass and not sit. Pot hung low on a Y of sticks. She cleaned my wound again. The skin looked less angry. The thread looked like it believed in its job. "Rest," she said, and if a word could tuck a man in, that one did. I lay back and watched the way light speckled the underside of leaves, the way leaves kept their secrets while telling mine. A cricket did the work of a whole orchestra until it didn't. Across the water, a deer tested our smell and decided to believe in us. In the middle blue of evening, a canteen floated past, nicked and stamped U.S., mouth broken. It turned slow in the current like a coin that can't decide which side it wants to be. "They're near," I said. "Yes," she said, "but the river is nearer." We ate beans and meat cut thin so it would remember tenderness. She showed me how her mother had taught her to bury the fire's heart under sand so heat stayed without light. I showed her how to listen for a rider by the way a dragonfly changes its mind. We traded small things that mattered more than big ones. "Your sister?" she said when the stars had found their places. "Tell me her name." "Ruth," I said, and the air put the syllable away like a precious small. "She wanted to be a teacher, which is a word that means a person who thinks she can put better ideas into other people's heads and not lose any of her own." "She teach you to run fast?" "She taught me to run toward," I said. "I forgot once." "You remember now," Ayana said. "Every step," I said. The night took on that deep weight that means morning will come if we pay attention. In it, we spoke of what a future might look like if we were the kind of people who got to keep one. A small lodge near water, a garden that learns our hands, a Mustang that thinks I'm a reasonable leader and not just another fool with oats. She said a name I didn't understand at first. Her mother's cousin. Somewhere south, somewhere higher, where people still know the difference between law and justice. We didn't say baby. We didn't say forever. We didn't have to. The river said both for us, and then kept moving. When sleep came, it was the kind that holds you without your permission. I woke to Ayana's hand on my forehead, cool as the river had been. "Fever go," she said. "You stubborn." "You're not wrong," I said. "You always this bossy with your patients?" "Only the ones too stubborn to die," she said, and laughter visited us again and looked like it might learn our address. Morning put its mouth on the edge of the world and blew light across us. We packed without hurry but without waste. Just as I swung into the saddle, the river told on the world, a hoarse snort downstream followed by the careful clink of a bit. Ayana's eyes cut to mine and we both learned something from the other's look. We were not done paying. We moved into brush heavy enough to have a plan of its own. Through the leaves I saw blue and dust and a face I had already memorized. Graham dismounted by the water and knelt to rinse his hands like a man who likes to be clean when he gets them dirty again. He glanced at the broken canteen in the eddy and frowned as if the river had disobeyed an order. Ayana put her palm on my knee. A stop, a stay, a wait. She pointed with her chin to a deer track that doubled on itself 3 times and then vanished into a cut between stones. "Like that," she whispered, breath hot on the day. "We make our sign wrong for them to read right." We backed our horses without a sound. The pass had taught us how to move like rock, We left no more than a rumor for men who prefer stories to tracks. When we reached the split in the wash, we took the branch that looked like it dead-ended and didn't. The land did us the favor a friend does when he lies to protect you. By noon, we had a sky so big it made faith look small and a wind that wanted to turn every word into a secret. I let my hand fall to the place on my side, where pain had decided to rest instead of fight. Ayana rode a little ahead now, eyes cutting the world into safe and not, hands easy on the reins. Like she was making a promise to the horse and the ground at the same time. We didn't talk about the ridge. We didn't talk about Prescott. We didn't talk about the paper that kept being right enough to be wrong. We talked about the next 2 miles and how a person can live inside 2 miles for a very long time if he needs to. The river kept the kind of peace that moves, not the kind that sits. We followed. And I said her name in my head, not because I was afraid to spend it out loud, but because it fit there so well. Ayana. Peaceful river. A thing that finds a way. Some words you don't keep. You kill. Night put its ear to the ground and listened to us think. I dreamed of rope turned to smoke and woke to the smell of it for real. The sign I'd burned had left a taste in the air, like pennies on the tongue. Mercy makes its own weather. By dawn, clouds had stacked on the horizon like fists. The windmill sulked. The mule wouldn't look me in the eye. Ayana stood by the door with my old coat wrapped close, her braids pulled tight like she had told her hair to behave, while her fear took a walk. She touched the scar wraps at her wrists, and then the knife on the table, and then the kettle on the stove, the way a person checks the corners of a room before deciding to stay in it. They will talk in town, she said, about smoke, about you. They always talk, I said. It's the only thing they do cheaper than drinking. We ate without salt because we'd used the last of it last week, and I hadn't ridden in to buy more since finding her. I could have told myself the store was too far, or the fence too needy, but the truth was simpler. The ridge had my attention like a gun barrel does, and I don't turn my back on voices I can't see. By noon, heat went glassy. On the eastern rise, riders stitched themselves out of mirage, not blue coats, town coats. Prescott's hat led the line, a little too new for an honest man. 5 this time, not 3. He'd brought boys who needed to prove a shape to their shadows. The one on the sorrel wore his father's pistol, like he wished to bully it into courage. They didn't call out from the fence. They came right up the yard like it was a street and the world was theirs to walk. Afternoon, Wyatt, Prescott said, as if we hadn't met yesterday. You didn't answer when opportunity knocked. I must have been out back setting fire to bad ideas, I said. He let that slide because he'd come with more than words. We'll look inside now, he said. You can save yourself trouble and money by not getting in the way. You brought a warrant? I asked, glancing toward the windmill so he'd have to follow my eyes and lose his rhythm. He grinned. Star on my chest is the only paper we need today. Ayana was already gone from the doorway. The shadow of her moved in the loft, as soft as prayer. I stepped down into the yard and let my rifle hang easy from one hand. You boys know how to read? I asked. Sign on the road says private. Another says Wyatt. First one means go back. Second one means this is where your boots start being rude. Cute, he said, and his men laughed the way men laugh when they want the echo to sound like bravery. Step aside. I didn't. There are days a man is made of gates. Prescott's eyes cooled a degree. You know what they left on that tree, don't you? He asked. Don't forgive. That wasn't to her. That was to us. You cut her down anyway. That makes you a message, too. I took a breath that wanted to be my last and shoved it deeper into my chest. She's a person, I said, simple as a fence post. Not a message? He shifted his weight, and I saw it, the small nod to the boy on the sorrel. The kid reached for his father's pistol, like it was agreement finally knocking. I lifted my rifle 1 inch and stopped. The yard held perfectly still, the way a stage does when the next line is late. Don't, I said to the boy. I wasn't begging. I was tired. Prescott cut in, voice light. We ain't here to shoot a neighbor, Wyatt, just to look under his bed. I sleep on the floor, I said, and the boy's mouth rattled against the grin he didn't earn. You're making this hard, Prescott said, the smile gone now. Good, I said. Hard makes you go home earlier. Something like respect crossed his face and then burned itself out. He nodded at the 2 in back. They slid off their horses and started toward the porch. The nearest hinge on my patience broke. You set foot on that step, I set you down in the yard, I said, and the rifle raised itself the rest of the way, like it had decided we were out of polite. That's when the wind saved a life. It brought the faint, crisp sound of a bugle line from somewhere behind the rise, thin but real. Every bluecoat in the territory hears that pitch in his bones. Prescott heard it too, and the calculation happened on his face like a storm rolling over a mesa. He didn't want to be standing on my porch when cavalry crested. "We'll be back," he said. He meant with more men and fewer lines in his head he had to recite for a judge later. "I'll be here," I said. I meant, I'll be anywhere she is. They turned and rode out at that unhurried pace that tells everybody you weren't chased off even when you were. The dust hung in the yard like a bad idea that refuses to leave the room. Ayana came down from the loft without sound and put her hand on my arm for exactly the amount of time a person touches a hot horseshoe to see if it's cooled. "You stand like a tree," she said, "but trees burn. We go tonight." "We go tonight," I said. We packed the house into 2 saddlebags. Everything I wanted to bring lived in a woman's hands and a river I hadn't met yet. I left the coffee tin because I didn't want mornings to taste like this place when trouble was done with. I took the Bible because Ruth had underlined the parts that made me less of a fool, and some days I needed the margin more than the text. Sundown slid a red coin under the door of the world. We didn't pick it up. The moon rose half shy and generous enough. We moved. The horses' hooves found their softness. The land offered a path and a promise the way it always does when you tell it please. At the second arroyo, 2 riders waited in shadow. Not Prescott's boys. Graham and a corporal whose mustache was trying to grow into authority. The lieutenant raised a hand that asked for talk. We reined in because I'm a fool for talk when bullets haven't called the tune yet. "Evenin'," he said. "I'd ask where you're going, Mr. Wyatt, but it's written on your horses." "Then maybe you'll wave us west and go about your own business," I said. "My business is the paper," he said. "And the paper says the girl with you cut a white woman's throat." Ayana moved the horse 1/2 step forward. "The paper lies," she said. Her voice surprised him. It surprised the dark. "A white man cut his own wife to keep land and blame us. Your paper helps him." Graham's jaw worked around a truth that didn't like him. "You have proof?" Ayana lifted her chin. "Firebird," she said. "Camp burned because we said no to dry land. Ask the priest who gave me beads for my mother's grave. Ask the woman in town with blue dress who traded for my moccasins, who heard the white man shout at his wife 3 nights, who saw bruises, who cried when soldiers came. She hides truth because men like you ask for paper only." Silence opened a door none of us wanted to walk through. The corporal shifted, tugged his mustache like it might provide a better answer. Graham looked at me, and then at Ayana, and then at the horizon where borders make liars of maps. "If I let you pass," he said, "I'm the man who lost a wanted killer. If I take you in and you're right, I'm the man who delivered a widow's murderer his cover." "Or," I said, "you're the man who looks past paper and sees people. There's a trail south most men miss. You could miss it too if you wanted to." The horses breathed. The moon remembered an older promise. Graham made his choice, a small one on the outside, a loud one where it hurts. He nudged his chestnut aside, opening a notch in the dark wide enough for 2 ghosts and their animals to become something else. "You never saw us," I said. He nodded. "I never saw you." Then softer to Ayana. "Find water." "We will," she said. We slipped the notch and became rumor. Behind us, the bugle called again, closer this time. Ahead, the border began to sound like river, and Mercy, still burning, learned to light our way instead of the men who wished it would scorch us. Some places don't let a man be in between. South of the second ridge, the world fell into scrub and teeth. Mesquite hooked at our knees. Cactus tossed its warnings and then tried to hug. The sky went big and white, and then dark, and then white again. The way a drunk changes his mind about an apology. We rode with our hats low and our hearts high because we felt the river somewhere ahead, like a word you can't remember until it saves you. Ayana rode point. She has a way with land. She listens to it until it tells her where it gets shy. We cut sign that only jackrabbits read, backed our tracks with the care of thieves who prefer not to be, and left small mistakes on purpose so men who liked answers would choose the wrong ones. When we stopped, it was only long enough to water the animals and check the wound that wanted to rehearse being important. The stitches held. Pain learned good manners. By midnight, stars made a road, and we took it. The border doesn't fence itself, it whispers. On one side, a town will give you the law and charge you extra. On the other, a mountain will ask you to climb and only count it a favor if you bring your breath back to tell about it. I wanted the mountain not because I liked work, but because my sister had died on a flat and I didn't trust flat places anymore. At dawn, we found a low draw strewn with stones like breadcrumbs too hard to eat. The river spoke ahead, not loud, not boastful, just sure. Ayana's shoulders dropped the way shoulders do when they remember they're not shields. The horses lifted their heads at the smell and forgot they'd been tired. We came up on it slow, a silver ribbon threading its way through reed and willow, shallow this month but not shallow-minded. Ayana slid down and walked to the bank like a person returning a borrowed thing. She knelt, cupped water, and poured it over her wrists. Tiny bubbles clung to the skin where rope had used to be. I watched that and felt something in me unclench. Forgiveness is not always a human word. Sometimes it's a sound water makes when it decides to be generous. Rest here, she said. We cross when shadow gets long. Someone behind us will do math on our shadows, I said. Yes, she said. But this place. She looked around as if the river had turned its head to listen. This place is friend. I wanted to believe the word the way she said it. I made camp under a cottonwood that had decided to grow sideways for the pleasure of it. Ayana boiled water, and we ate the last of the jerky as if it had not been the last a dozen bites ago. I took off my shirt and checked the stitches. She made a disapproving sound that could have belonged to a nurse or a wife. I pretended to be offended and loved the pretending. We slept in turns. When I woke, Ayana was sitting cross-legged, a small bundle of cloth in her lap, stitching something I could not name. Her fingers moved with the patience of a person who refuses to be hurried into joy. What are you making? I asked. White shirt, she said. Small one, for later. She didn't look up because the needle had its own mind and she was winning an argument with it. My mother say, you make a thing before you need it, then the world knows you're coming. I watched her work and felt the day settle into us. A hawk stitched the sky to itself in looping thread. A fish popped and left a ring that widened until it forgot why it started. The river told a joke to the reeds, and the reeds tried not to laugh in case the wind saw. By afternoon, the heat had misplaced its temper, and clouds shouldered each other like men in a saloon with only one story worth telling. Thunder talked from a far room. I stood and looked north across the flats and saw it. A dust thread, too straight for wind, too steady for cattle. Riders, 5, 6. The number didn't stay still. Prescott, almost certainly. Graham had given us a notch. Prescott would bring a hole. Ayana saw them the same time I did. We cross now, she said, already packing the pot, pinching out the last ember, hiding our small life under leaves. We led the horses into the water at a shallow run, their legs splashing silver. The river was cold and woke the animals to decisions they hadn't wanted to make. On the far bank, we scrambled 2 horse lengths up a cut no one would notice at first glance and stilled like stone. Water will take your sound if you ask it right. We asked. The riders came to the near bank and milled, swearing the kind of words men keep for animals and women when they want to sound taller. Prescott's voice cut through like a tin knife on china. They were here, he said. Smell it. Why, it smells like coffee and bad judgment. Tracks, someone asked. Washed, another said. Then we wait, Prescott said. They'll make a mistake. I didn't intend to. The storm rolled close, the kind that makes the ground decide to remember being ocean. Lightning sketched a map that had nothing to do with ours. Rain came in hard, straight lines, then crooked. The river, friend that it was, rose by a whisper and kept talking. On the far edge of our cut, Ayana took a handful of mud and pressed it into her palm, then slapped it on the rock, a print that faced the wrong way and made the cliff think it was ground. She added another and another until a trail climbed to nothing and ended nowhere. Prescott saw it like I wanted him to. There, he said, the joy of a man who believes his own eyes too much. 3 of them dismounted and scrambled, boots looking for purchase on a lie. One slipped, cursed, slid, and banged his arm into agreement. The others made noise enough to tell me they'd be a minute late to whatever came next. Now, Ayana breathed. We backed our horses away from the cut. On the line the rain was erasing as fast as we rode it. Then we turned, stayed low, along the bank, and vanished into reeds that had spent a lifetime practicing how to hide birds. The river covered us with its voice. I whispered thanks, not to any god I'd met in a church, but to the steady that lives beneath panic. When we broke from the screen a quarter-mile down, the bank gave us a mercy path that led up into mesquite. We climbed. The sky split itself. Rain demanded attention, and thunder argued with its own echo. We gained the top and found ourselves on a flat that ran 2 miles to a low line of rock. Beyond that, Mexico, at least the kind that agrees to be Mexico, on maps drawn by men who have never sweated here. We ran the horses, not foolish, but fast enough to keep ahead of our ghosts. The storm threw nails at our faces, and we took them like men who forge. At the far rock, a gap opened that felt like a mouth asking to be used. We slipped through, and the world changed. The smell, the weight of the air, the opinion the ground had of our hooves. Borders aren't fences, they're breaths. We didn't stop until the storm did, which is to say we stopped because the horses asked, not because we had an answer. Under a tangle of oak and something that might have been mercy, we slid to earth and let the land hold us. I touched my side and came away pink instead of red. Ayana looked and nodded, which is a more generous blessing from her than words. "We're over," I said. "For now," she said, and the 2 words held both relief and the hard wisdom it takes to stay alive. That night we ate roots and the last of the flour as a cake that pretended to be bread, and we slept without waking to every leaf because the storm had wrung the world out and left it softer. Before sleep took me all the way, Ayana slid the small white shirt between our bedrolls like an agreement. I closed my hand around a corner of it and pretended it was the future, holding me back from the edge. The desert had made us choose. We chose. Tomorrow would ask us to do it again. Sometimes peace arrives dressed like ordinary. We built a life near water that had learned to keep secrets. A lodge of pine and hide took shape, where the river's bend agreed to shade afternoons. The reeds whispered to each other about us and decided to be kind. Ayana taught me how to weave a mat that doesn't argue with bare feet. I taught a young Mustang that a hand on the neck can mean praise, not punishment. Days began to stack like wood that will burn slow and sweet when winter comes. We traded with a camp 2 days south. Women who came in pairs and laughed with their hands. A man whose hat had seen more weddings than funerals. A boy with a scar and a flute that made the river stand still. I swapped a bridle I'd made for salt and coffee. Ayana traded beadwork for a sack of cornmeal and a story about a snake that knew math. The world changed its mind about us one small thing at a time. Ayana's belly rounded the way dawn rounds the edge of night. Not sudden, not shy, just correct. She stitched the tiny white shirt until it looked like a promise. She hummed to it. She hummed to me, too, when she thought I was asleep. I wasn't always. Some evenings we walked the water path with our hands, touching but not holding. Like 2 people who understand the river already has a grip on both. We said Ruth's name. We said Ayana's mother's name, Tala. We put both into the air and asked the night to remember. I didn't hang the rifle on a peg too far from reach. Habit is a fence you don't tear down in spring, no matter how green it gets. But I stopped sleeping in my boots. There's a line between caution and surrender, and I wanted to stay on the good side of it for a while. One afternoon, the wind changed without asking for permission. It came from the north, with a taste of dust, and something else I recognized and didn't want to. News. The Mustang lifted his head and stared at a point where the trail collapses into its own excuses. Ayana stepped out of the lodge and put her palm on her belly, the way women do when they are not guarding and not showing off, just acknowledging. "Riders," I said. "Yes," she said, already moving the pot off the flame, already tidying a room that didn't need it. "Fear has chores it assigns. They came in 2s, careful, not Prescott. Not his kind of swagger, blue and dust. Lieutenant Graham and a private I didn't know, they reined in without splashing arrogance on the river. Graham's hat brim shadowed his eyes. He looked older by months that couldn't be counted on a calendar. "We've got no fight with you here," I said, hands open, close enough to the rifle to be honest about who I still was. "Nor I with you," he said. Word travels. Prescott went too far. Took money to say what paper wanted, not what happened. Killed a drifter in the flats and called it justice. The town didn't care for the smell of it when they weren't drunk. I felt a heat in my chest that wasn't anger and wasn't its opposite. "And the woman?" "The truth is stubborn," he said. A storekeeper's wife spoke. Priest spoke. A man whose landline suddenly moved after his wife died ran out of friends to buy. He's on trial. He glanced at Ayana, then away, as if her dignity might burn him if he looked too long. Your name cleared nowhere official, Miss Ayana, but less men will think they win a coin by your death. That's something. Ayana nodded once. Something, she said. Graham shifted in the saddle, uncomfortable in his good deed. I didn't come to arrest you, he said. I came to tell you some dogs stopped running. Others will find new scent. He looked at the lodge, at the garden the river had helped us convince the ground to accept, at the Mustang who had decided the lieutenant wasn't trouble. And to ask a favor, I laughed before I meant to. From me? From both of you, he said. There's a girl in the holdings north, half Yaqui, half Tejano. Her mother died last winter. The town calls her names and throws rocks at the door until a man comes out to stop them. The man is 71. Names don't bounce off him like they used to. He let the request. Sit with us like another rider waiting at the bend. Ayana stepped closer. What is her name? Isabel, he said. Ayana looked at me and I looked at the river and the river pretended to examine a fish. We were building a life that fit our two hands and one more about to arrive. But the world keeps asking if your mercy is the kind that multiplies or the kind that ends where you get comfortable. When? I asked. Tomorrow night, too, he said. I can't be seen helping, but I can be here making a lot of noise in the other direction. Ayana touched her belly again and then dropped her hand. We take her, she said. It wasn't a debate, it was a weather report. Graham nodded, like respect was a tin cup, and he'd decided to pass it. Thank you, he said. He shifted, hesitated. About the day at your place. You did what you could, I said. To keep him from the cliff he didn't need to walk off. Sometimes a notch is all a man can open. He looked relieved at being spared confession. May the river keep you, he said. It was the best blessing he could borrow that wouldn't set his uniform on fire. They turned and left the way men do when they intend to come back with trouble and a plan to keep it busy. When they'd gone, Ayana and I stood in the space their horses had braided into air and measured it with our breaths. You sure? I asked. She smiled, and it was like water pouring itself. I am a river calder. Rivers collect. We prepared. I checked tack, counted cartridges twice, and walked the trail north until it learned my feet. Ayana packed a blanket that had never been cold and a small piece of sweetbread she'd saved from a trade because she said sweetness belongs at the beginning of things. She took the tiny white shirt in her hands and spoke to it. I didn't listen because some conversations aren't for men. Night tasted of mesquite and watching. We left the lodge to the reeds, and the reeds promised to lie if asked. The moon cooperated. Stars nudged each other and pretended not to eavesdrop. We rode without whispering, the kind of quiet that says, I'm with you, I'm not going anywhere, and also I hear your heart. The holding pens north of the bend are a habit the border wears, a rough circle of posts, a shack with one window, the smell of cattle that never finished telling their story. Isabel's place sat 50 yards beyond, a 2-room clapboard with a sag that told of winters men didn't show up for. A lamp burned in one window like a small stubborn tooth. I saw the boys before they saw us. 4, not drunk enough to be stupid, not sober enough to be brave, a sweet spot where cruelty flowers, rocks in hand, one rock already thrown, testimony on the dirt. A voice from inside told them to go home. A voice outside told the first voice to reconsider. I felt the old heat rise and set my jaw against it. Ayana touched my knee. Gentle, she said, like water through stone. We rode into the yard as if we had been expected, as if we had an invitation that had cost more than a stamp. Evening, I said, easy as coffee. I'm lost. The line is older than fences and still earns its keep. Where are you heading? One boy asked, which is always the first mistake. Toward men, I said, on and away from boys who confuse rocks with names. I gave them a look that was less a threat and more an education. Silence considered its options. The oldest of them, freckles drowned and mean, lifted his chin. We ain't doing nothing wrong. She don't belong. Ayana slid down and stood with the ease of a woman who has already survived and therefore negotiates from a position more stable than their father's wallets. I belong to myself, she said clear. This house belongs to the right to sleep. She pointed at the rocks. Pick up your mistakes. Two of them did without thinking, and then realized they had obeyed, and got angry at their own hands. The oldest grinned to save face and let the grin fall when it didn't like where it landed. You talk big for, he started, chose a word that would have made me load the rifle quicker, and swallowed it when he saw my eyes change temperature. Graham made his noise right on time, bugle and boots and the clipped circus of a patrol, not here but near. The boys recalculated. Prices shifted. We're going, the oldest said, and spit in the dust to sign his retreat as if the earth were grateful for the moisture. When they'd gone, a thin man with white hair opened the door and peered around it like a memory-testing daylight. Isabel stood behind him, a small face with large eyes, 8 maybe, hair braided like she'd been taught by someone who loved patience. We're here to move you, I said gently, if that's what you want. Isabel looked at Ayana, not me, and saw the river. Is there bread? She asked. Ayana opened the bag and showed her the small sweet saved for beginning. There is. The old man put a shaking hand on the girl's head and then moved it to the doorframe like he was patting the house goodbye. Go on, Isa, he said. This world is heavier for women. I can hold it a little longer here. Come with us, I said, meaning it. He smiled, the kind of smile that knows math I can't do. I'm from the kind of soil that doesn't transplant. He nodded at Ayana. You'll make her into a river. Rivers don't forget their first stones. We took the girl and left him his porch. When we crossed the yard, stars shifted to make room. Isabel sat the saddle like she'd been born in a world that expected it. Ayana rode beside her and told her about a little white shirt and a lodge that smelled like clean water and wood smoke. I rode beside the knight and promised it I'd do my share. Mercy had called again. We answered. Tomorrow the weather would report back to men who don't read the sky. We'd be ready to translate. Every choice asks for a second choice. We reached the lodge before dawn. The reeds shushed us in. Isabel slept before her head found the folded blanket. Ayana tucked the girl with a tenderness I recognized because it had learned me first. I checked the trail behind us on habit and on the off chance that habit had missed something. The river said we were alone in the way rivers say anything. By moving on, morning tasted like new bread because Ayana woke early and decided sweetness should greet the day. Isabel stood at the door and watched the water with a seriousness that made the river sit up straighter. It always goes? She asked. It always goes, Ayana said, and it always brings back. I taught the Mustang to accept the small hands that braided his forelock. Isabel laughed when he puffed at her palm, and the sound set the lodge's beams humming. I felt it under my sternum. A man can live a long time on a sound like that. We made a plan that wasn't a plan. Keep low, trade modest, make friends that prefer quiet, teach the ground our footsteps so it misses us when we go and remembers us when we return. Graham came once more at dusk to say the trial had begun, that the husband's mouth was an empty bucket, that the storekeeper's wife's testimony was a spring nobody could cap. Paper doesn't like to apologize, he said, but sometimes it stops shouting. Sometimes stopping is the apology, I said. He nodded and watched Isabel chase a dragonfly until the dragonfly decided to be caught. You did right, he said. It cost him something to say it. I paid him back with a nod worth the same. 2 nights later, the river argued with the moon and made silver seem like a new idea. I woke to the sound of a twig making a bad decision under a boot. Not cavalry, not boys, men who play it quiet and sometimes win. I rolled and had the rifle in my hands before my knees remembered how old we were. Ayana's hand found my arm and pressed once. Not yet. A voice out of the dark used my name like it paid rent on it. Wyatt. Prescott, I said, because lies are noisy. Thought you crossed, he said. Thought you were a story I could tell my friends about a fool who ran too far. But then a friend in town told a friend in the valley that a man with a scar and a woman with eyes like a storm bought salt south of where the law was last seen, and I thought, why let a little line on a map tell me which pocket I can fill? He had 6 men this time. 2 hung back by the trail like punctuation with guns. 4 moved in that half circle men draw when they hope to become parentheses around your life. You can go home, I said. All of you. We are home, Prescott said, and I felt a true thing in an ugly mouth. Home is where the cash is. Ayana stepped into the doorway, not carrying a weapon, carrying herself. You will not come into this house, she said, and the river hushed to listen. You will leave the girls sleeping. You will turn your animals around and teach them a better trick. Prescott laughed the way a nail laughs at wood. I like you, he said, which is what a snake says to a warm rock. But I like money better. Sometimes the world gets simple and mean. He raised his hand. 2 rifles came up like they owed him their lives. I set my sights on his hat brim and considered removing the part of him that believed the rest was invincible. Then the night did a favor for once without asking for a receipt. A coyote trotted between us on its own business. One of Prescott's men, nerves wired to stupidity, fired at it. The shot cracked the quiet in half and threw both pieces into the river. In the space the echo left, Ayana shouted a word in her language that made the Mustang move without waiting. Straight at the nearest man, ears flat, teeth bared like the wild he still loved. The man stumbled and his shot took a star out of the sky instead of a piece of me. I fired once into the dirt in front of Prescott's boots. The ground bit him. He flinched like a man who finally believed the floor exists. Next one removes something you'll miss, I said, voice calm and not mine. The lodge door opened wider behind Ayana. Isabel stood there, eyes giant, holding the little white shirt like a flag from a country she wanted to join. The sight of her put a weight on every man's trigger finger that it couldn't lift. Prescott cursed the man who'd shot early, cursed the coyote for having the audacity to be born, cursed the river because it sounded like it was on our side. He recalculated and came up with the number he hated. We'll be back, he said, the same as before, the same lie truth wears when it's tired. Next time, your friend in blue won't blow his horn for you. Next time, I said, you'll bring a better plan. They left. The reed sighed and returned to gossip. I set the rifle down and let my hands remember the shape of gentleness. Isabel put the small shirt against Ayana's belly and whispered to whoever she thought might be listening. Ayana smiled at her and then at me, and the smile asked a question I'd been asking myself long enough to know the answer. We can't stay, I said. Not now, she said. Soon again. We packed the lodge into fewer bags than a life deserves. We left the mat Ayana had woven because someone's bare feet would need it. We left a fish trap by the bend with a small stone tied to it like a signature. We took the shirt and the beads and the map I had drawn in my head of every kindness within 2 days' ride. The past that had once saved us opened its mouth again, and we rode into it with a girl who thought the moon was a friend and a woman who made the river look like it had been designed after her. We reached the high meadow before dawn and slept in shifts while the wind rehearsed its old stories. In the morning, we moved farther south to a canyon where a spring comes out of stone, as if stone were mercy and not just memory. We made another lodge, smaller, more cautious, but with room for laughter if laughter decided to stop by. Prescott would try again. Men like him don't read endings. They just turn pages until rage or luck runs out. I knew this. Ayana knew this. The spring knew this and offered water anyway. We drank. We lived. We waited for the moment when waiting stops being our best trick. When it came like weather. Truth travels slower than rumor, but it travels. Graham arrived 3 days into our canyon, alone and unworried by the fact that he shouldn't have been. He dismounted with a sound that said he'd been on a horse longer than paper would like. Trial's done, he said before hello. Verdicts useful and unsatisfying in equal measure. Guilty? I asked. Of killing his wife, Mies, he said. Of blaming others with a story that fit inside his friends' heads. 20 years. He'll see 10 if he breathes that long. He took off his hat and turned it in his hands like a question. Town doesn't know what to do with itself when it can't cheer at a hanging. Ayana sat on a rock and watched him like he was an animal deciding whether to be dangerous. And paper? She asked. Paper printed a column that used your band's name without apology, he said. Then, 2 days later, it printed a smaller one that spelled it different and called it regret. He put the hat back on. I brought you something better than paper. He reached in his saddlebag and pulled out a pouch, small and heavy with meaning. Inside, a string of beads, blue and white, worn smooth by prayer or grief or both. Ayana's hands flew to her mouth. For a second, she was the girl under cottonwoods again, and then she was the woman who had cut her own ropes by living. My mother's, she breathed. They took from her body. The priest kept them for someone brave enough to come claim them, Graham said. He decided that was me, and then decided it wasn't. I agreed with his second decision and told him I'd pass them to the right hands without writing a line about it. Ayana took the beads like they might break under the weight of joy. She pressed them to her forehead, and then to her belly, and then to the place on my chest, where Ruth's absence had built a small chapel. "Thank you," she told him, a phrase with a longer tail than English usually lets it have. Graham looked embarrassed by the size of her gratitude and then relieved by it. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Prescott's cut new teeth. He's working with a man who paints maps for money and men. They mean to make your canyon a toll road and your river a well with a lid." He let the saddle suffer a punch from his fist. "I can get you a day, no more." "Then a day," I said. "We've made more out of less." He nodded. "There's one more thing." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden cross. Ruth's. The teacher in town had kept it for when someone came. No one did. I thought. He stopped. Graham is not a man who finishes every thought. It's a skill, not a flaw. I took the cross and it didn't burn. "She'd like that you brought it," I said. I wanted to say more and didn't. The canyon had already heard enough about the dead and deserved some quiet. That night we planted two things: the beads over the doorway on a nail that wanted meaning, and Ruth's cross on the inside of the same beam where only we would see it. Isabel watched and asked the kind of questions people ask when they want to learn how to remember. Ayana answered with a story about firebirds and rivers and how both know why they exist without bragging about it. At dawn, smoke found us. It came from the ridge like a man who'd been memorizing our address since the day we learned to pronounce it. Prescott didn't call out this time. He didn't circle. He came down the slot like he owned stone now, too. The map man rode at his shoulder with a grin that said, "A pencil can be a weapon if you draw enough lines." "Nice place," Prescott said. "Be a shame if someone surveyed it into a better man's pocket." "It's a canyon," I said. "It pockets itself." He ignored me and pointed at Ayana. "I'll be doubling the price for runaways with smart mouths," he said. "You'll fetch it." Ayana didn't flinch. "You fetch water when you are thirsty," she said. "You fetch a woman only when you plan to drown." He nodded like she'd played the game, and he'd award points later. Then he lifted his hand, and men poured down both sides of the slot. 10, maybe 11. Graham had bought us a day. This wasn't it. I moved to the spring mouth and set the rifle across a rock that had been waiting for the job since volcanoes were real. Ayana got Isabel in the small bag with the shirt in it and moved them toward the back crack where a person could squeeze into another season if the season agreed. I caught her eye, and she caught mine, and in that second, we decided to finish what we'd promised each other on a different mountain. The first shot came low and stupid. I corrected the error for them with one high and warning, a bark that told the canyon we were not done being stubborn. Prescott laughed, a sound that thinks it's brave. "You can't shoot a river," he said. "You run out of bullets before it runs out of water." "Maybe," I said. "But I only need enough to convince you you're thirsty elsewhere." Gunfire is a conversation men conduct when they've forgotten letters. We spoke it better than they expected. Stone threw back their echoes in confusion. The slot funneled noise into a lie that helped us more than them. Isabel didn't cry. The Mustang didn't bolt. Ayana didn't pray out loud. I did, but only with my jaw. Then a thing happened I had not planned but had hoped would. Graham's bugle snapped from the north lip, and shadows with discipline became men with guns and a sense of what justice can look like on a good day. "You're on the wrong side of the line, Mr. Prescott," Graham called, voice legal and tired. "You brought the wrong friends," Prescott spat and called the map man a name that can't reproduce until it finds a mirror. He tried to recalculate in a canyon that had already counted him. "We'll settle this," he said, facing me again, "where paper won't interfere." "Paper interferes less than you think," I said. "It just prefers endings." He lifted his gun, not to shoot, but to make a point in the air with metal. That lazy, arrogant arc wrote his fate. I fired and took the pistol from his hand and the skin with it. He yelled a word too big for the canyon and fell back into the men who had come to watch him be clever. The map man pulled at his sleeve and pulled at his courage and came away with neither. Graham's men moved down the sides in steady steps. No one wanted a canyon gunfight that would be spoken of as tragedy and then used as sport. Prescott looked at the lieutenant and saw no notch this time. He looked at me and saw a man who had learned a single trick and was prepared to use it until it became a principle. "Go home," I said. He did, bleeding pride and a little hand. He would heal wrong in ways that would improve his future, only by accident. The rest scattered, like a bad idea, in a good storm. The canyon breathed out. Graham came down and stood with us, where the spring turns rock into forgiveness. He didn't smile. "You'll need to go farther south," he said. "Or higher." "Higher," Ayana said. "We like to hear the river from above." He nodded. "There's a shelf, 2 days' ride. Pines. A view that makes men quiet." He adjusted his hat and pretended the brim needed it. "I'll keep the paper busy. I'll keep the boys guessing. The rest is yours." "It always was," I said. He touched the brim and left, and the canyon kept his secret with ours. Some places teach you how to listen. We climbed into a world that smelled like rain, even when it wasn't about to. Pines stood like old men who were not tired of standing. The shelf Graham had promised held a view that inserted humility where arrogance had planned to build a cabin. We built instead, a lodge with a roof that didn't argue, and a door that knew when to let wind in to sing and when to keep it out to rest. Ayana moved slower now, not reluctant, merely precise. She'd put a hand on her back and stretch in a way that made the pine needles decide to be quieter underfoot. Isabel learned the names of birds and then invented better ones. The Mustang found a friend in a bay mare that came out of nowhere and stayed. I split wood with the attention a man gives a task he can finish when the rest of his life refuses to. Nights got cold enough to make the stars huddle. Inside, the fire read to us from its one book, and we listened as if the story might change if we loved it. Enough. Ayana taught Isabel a lullaby that finds its own harmony, and sometimes I heard Ruth humming along at a distance I could live with. The belly told us our calendar better than the sky. One morning, Ayana woke and looked at me with a calm that moved the earth. "Today," she said. We sent Isabel to fetch water and to tell the pines it was time. We laid blankets and boiled cloths and set out a knife that had learned to mind its own business. Ayana took my hand and then let it go and then took it again, and I watched a woman turn pain into a door and then walk through it to bring a person along. Birth is work that makes all other work ashamed of its boasting. She labored with the patience of mountains and the anger of storms and the humor of women who know men are useful on Tuesdays. I held when she told me to hold and moved when she told me to move and prayed only with my breath. When the baby came, the room learned a new sound and immediately improved. A daughter, slick with the river's permission. Ayana laughed and cried, and then only laughed. Isabel cried and laughed, and then only cried. I forgot how to stand, and then remembered. "Name?" I asked. Not because I wanted to be the man who said it first, but because names are doors, too. "Anna Ruth," Ayana said, and the lodge filled with 2 women at once and all their mothers. I did the thing every father thinks no one has ever done before, counted fingers and toes like the world might have forgotten to include them. She gripped my finger like an agreement I had no intention of breaking. Outside, wind moved through pine and made a hymn out of air. We lived large in a small space for days that arrived clean and left cleaner. Anna Ruth smelled like bread in summer and the reason men stop drinking before they say something they mean. Ayana healed with the speed of water and the care of stone. Isabel learned swaddling the way the river learns banking, by doing it too tight once and then just right forever. I hunted short and close, brought rabbits in 5 steps and deer in 50, never more, because leaving the shelf felt like asking the world too large a question. Sometimes I'd see a dust line far off and pretend it was weather. Sometimes it was. When the first snow came, it came like forgiveness. Quiet, thorough, unsolicited. We packed cracks with moss and laughter. We tacked blankets to bare boards and moved our bed near the fire until the lodge learned to be warm without begging. Ayana told stories that braided firebird with Bethlehem, priest with elder, river with Jordan, Ruth with Tala, and Isabel fell asleep mid-smile more nights than not. One afternoon, when the light had gone the color of birch bark and the air tasted of something metallic and sweet, I saw a single rider on the far ridge. He watched the lodge with the stillness of a man who enjoys being unwelcome. I raised my hand without the rifle in it. He watched. He turned. He left. Men like that prefer to see you see them. It buys them time they haven't earned. Graham's note arrived 2 days later, tucked into a sack of salt carried by a trader who didn't see anything. Not even his own shadow. The paper sleeps. Prescott limps. A new badge wants glory and a map. Don't be the story he can ride. No signature. He didn't need one. Ayana read it and laid it by the beads. We stay until staying is foolish, Kate, she said. Then we move like people who've practiced, I said. We practiced. We kept bags, shallow and ready. We taught Anna Ruth to ride sleep in a sling that hung from Ayana's shoulder like a promise. We slept with boots near and forgiveness nearer. We didn't speak of leaving to make it hurt less when we did. That's a lie people tell. It hurts anyway. On a blue noon that smelled of iron and pine sap, Isabel came running from the ridge path where she likes to teach the wind to be faster. Men, she said. 10, maybe more. One with hat like tin dish. Deputy, I said, or someone who bought a badge from a catalog. Ayana tied on the sling without being told. Her eyes turned river dark. I took the rifle and the map I keep behind my ribs. Pass, I asked. Pass, she said. We left bread on the coals and water half lifted from the pot as if interrupted by a joke. I scattered our footprints with a broom made of willow and prayer. We vanished into the notch a squirrel had shown Isabel last summer and reached the spine of the ridge where the world unfolds in both directions, the way a hand opens to bless or to warn. From there, we watched the men come to the lodge and do what men like that always do: knock on things they don't own, touch what they haven't been offered, misread rooms, and congratulate themselves for adding air to a space that had already known how to breathe. The tin hat deputy found the beads, frowned like the alphabet had insulted him, and left them because greed is illiterate when it comes to memory. They took our salt and left our stories. I could live with that. When they rode out, they chose the wrong trail on purpose because the right one was not available to men who explain the world to themselves by pointing at it. We moved in the other direction, not fast, not slow, exactly as quick as a family with a 3-week-old who thinks the sky is a ceiling of milk. The pines kept counsel. The wind carried our names carefully and dropped them over the Mexico line like seeds it had taken too long to deliver. We said goodnight to the lodge without a word and knew it would keep for someone who needed it next. Mercy is not a thing you own. It's a thing you pass along. Every kindness buys a debt in a town you may never visit. We curved back east to a valley that decided to be green in a season when brown was cheaper. A spring made itself available out of rock as if embarrassed by its generosity. We built nothing this time. We borrowed shade under a cottonwood that had the courtesy to welcome without questions. For 2 days, we were not found. I remembered how to lay in grass with a baby on my chest and not plan a war. On the 3rd day, a man with a tin star and the wrong jaw rode into our borrowed yard. He was too young to be cynical and too proud to read a map. Deputy Hale, he said by way of apology. I'm looking for a Wyatt and a woman who ain't his kind. Ayana stood behind me with Anna Ruth asleep on her, Isabel at her hip, both made of patience. You've found kindness, I said. If you're hunting trouble, it's further north today. He squinted, a look men favor when they want to seem smarter. You got a mouth on you for someone without a town. I have land and water and a family, I said. Town's a place I visit when I forget how to count. He swung down, too close to my fire. You're wanted for aiding a fugitive, he said, reciting from a script that had to work if he wanted to be someone. You can make it easy. Only thing easy here is the grass, I said. You should sit in it before you mistake it for rope. He puffed up like bread with too much yeast. You got a sharp way of talking. I have a sharp history, I said. Talk is the gentle part. He spotted the beads over Ayana's shoulder, the cross at my neck, the small white shirt folded on a rock because the baby had finally fallen asleep without it. He didn't know which item to be insulted by first. You people think you can make a church out of the dirt, he said. We know we can, Ayana said, and her voice picked up stones in it. You can pray or you can leave. He lifted his hand in the way men do when they have learned to get a dog's attention with it. His horse shied. The Mustang stepped forward out of nowhere because he still loved theater. Hale startled and put his hand down because he preferred his fingers unstepped on. He looked from horse to river to us and chose the wrong thing to threaten. I'll take the girl, he said. The little one. She don't belong with... He aborted the sentence when he saw my face change shape. There's no wind where you're heading, I said. Don't talk, just ride. He laughed, too quick, and in that laugh I heard the sound of a boy trying to be history. He reached for his gun. My rifle was already leveled. The space between choice and consequence got narrow and hot. I didn't want to shoot him. I also didn't want him to be alive in the world if the world meant him to be this bold around children. A single note cut the air. Not bugle. Flute. The boy from the trading camp stepped out of the cottonwood's shadow with his scar and his song and played a tune that doesn't belong to any one people but reminds all of them they had grandmothers. Hale's hand hesitated. In that pause, a woman from the camp laid a palm on his horse's neck and whispered a few words, and the animal reevaluated its rider. "You're outnumbered," I said, which was true in the way that matters. Not men, stories. Hale swallowed and found himself 40 miles from any instruction he'd ever been offered. He lowered his hand, not because he was convinced, but because somewhere his mother had taught him to measure a room before he broke it. "I'll be back," he said, the only line they ever give men like him. "When you come back," I said, "bring hunger, we'll feed you, and maybe a question you didn't bring today." He mounted. He hesitated. "You cut down that girl," he said, a last attempt to argue with my past. "I cut a rope," I said. "She cut herself free." He left. The camp faded back into the trees, as if the trees preferred to keep credit. The flute went on for a few more measures and then decided it had earned its keep. Ayana exhaled the breath she'd lent the world. Isabel giggled for no reason other than being 8 and spotting a bird doing a better version of flying than the day before. Anna Ruth slept and practice-breathed and made a tiny fist that promised she'd learn to open it. That night, the fire learned a new song, a lullaby in which men shoot only the sky, the river keeps all its names, and paper runs out of ink before it runs out of names to apologize for misspelling. I sat up after the others slept and thought about the price of mercy. Every time you pay it, the world charges you a bit more. But a child's breath pays you back with a currency that doesn't tarnish. I thought of Ruth's cross and Tala's beads and Graham's face when he brought the two together. I thought of Prescott nursing his hand and the map man redrawing a line with an eraser that finally learned shame. I thought of Hale's jaw adjusting itself to the possibility of being attached to a better man. Ayana woke and came to sit beside me, set her shoulder on mine in a way that says we both own this weight and neither of us owes the other for carrying it. "You are awake," she said. "Counting," I said. "What?" "Debts and repayments," I said. "We're still ahead." She nodded. "We will be ahead in morning, too." She tilted her head to listen. "The river says so." "Does it?" I said, smiling because I believed her, not because rivers make appointments. "They always do," she said, and put her hand over mine until counting became holding and holding, became sleeping with eyes open, and then sleeping with eyes closed, and then finally sleeping. By morning the camp had moved, as is the generosity of those who understand pursuit. Hale did not come back. The deputy with the tin dish on his head moved east to chase a rumor about rustlers because paper had finally offered him a story with less math and more shouting. Prescott limped into less relevance. Graham wrote fewer notes and trusted us to interpret the silence. We took the white shirt to the river and dipped it, not to wash, but to teach it the taste of water. Ayana said the name Anna Ruth to the air again and again until it sounded new and finished at the same time. Isabel found a smooth black stone and declared it a key. "To what?" I asked. "To keep," she said, and pocketed it with gravitas. We were not done being chased, but sometimes mercy buys you a season. We took that season and spent it on learning to laugh louder than echoes. Not all endings close. Some keep moving. Months passed in a calendar we made with our hands. Anna Ruth learned to aim her gaze and then her smile and then her accusation. Ayana taught Isabel how to sew a line that won't come loose when the day does. I broke the Mustang once more on a sharp turn he invented to keep me honest, and he forgave me, and I apologized with apples. The lodge we had left near the pine shelf found new people and kept them. The mat Ayana wove took new steps and did not complain. The fish trap at the first river caught someone else's dinner and reputation. The canyon held our secret until it turned into a story a grandmother told to make children believe in water. Graham came twice, not to warn, but to listen. He wore the same hat because men like him do, and he looked less tired because other men finally were. "Paper wants new villains," he said one evening, while Anna Ruth fell asleep on his arm because she had decided he was furniture. "It ran out of yours, or it realized villains are expensive to print when they sue." "Let it," I said. "We've got work." He nodded like men nod when they are done pretending to understand the uses of words. Prescott sold his badge and bought a store, he said. He will be happy if he learns interest rates. The map man got hired by a railroad that will fire him as soon as it learns to read better. Deputy Hale married a woman who keeps his jaw from breaking. And you? Ayana asked. I stopped playing the bugle when it isn't needed, he said. Mostly I listen. He left us a sack of coffee big enough to feel like love and took with him the memory of a baby's weight he had forgotten he needed. When he rode away, I saw how a uniform can be worn by a man who lets it wash in the river without taking the color out of his skin. We built a small garden against the bank where the river allows vanity. Corn came up like gossip in a small town. Beans climbed a pole like ambition in a big one. Squash did what squash do, bullied everything around it, and still earned gratitude. Ayana hummed to the leaves, and they hugged her without hands. Isabel invented a game that uses stones, shadows, and promises, and declared herself the undefeated champion. On a day when the sky was a sheet washed clean and the wind was a rumor that forgot its line, Ayana took me to the bend we'd first called ours and knelt in the water. We never finished, she said. Finished what? Being married, she said. We said wife, we said husband in a place that needed us to run. Now we say it where the world can hear and not turn it into a hunt. I looked at her and saw the girl under the cottonwoods and the woman who cut fire from dust and the mother who sings to beads and bread. I saw the river, remembering. All right, I said. Let's give the water something to do with all that listening. We stood in the shallows. Isabel held Anna Ruth, solemn for once, because ceremonies have their own gravity. I said a few words I stole from Ruth's favorite book, and a few I borrowed from the Firebird, and Ayana said some in her tongue that mean more than translation allows. We put our joined hands underwater and let the current decide how to bless them. It did. After, we ate bread and honey a trader had owed me and declared it a feast. The wind tried to blow out the small candle I'd brought from a town I still didn't trust and couldn't stop. We laughed until laughter stopped being something we did and became something we lived in. When night came, it came soft. We lay in the doorway with our feet in the lodge and our heads in the stars and told stories that end mid-sentence because sleep is a better punctuation. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote remembered a song and sang it to a mate who wasn't convinced, and then was. The river kept its appointment with distance. I think sometimes of the sign, "Don't forgive." Wood and paint and fury borrowed from a man who didn't know what to do with his own hands. I burned it. The smoke went wherever smoke goes when it has nothing left to hurt. If the letters still exist, they exist in a sky that learned a better sentence. If this is a love story, and it is, it's also a story about the day a man cut a rope because he had decided at last to cut it in himself. It's about a woman who refused to be bait and became a bridge. It's about a girl who learned the river's grammar before the town's and will be safer for it. It's about a bluecoat who discovered his uniform isn't a religion. It's about a storekeeper's wife who told the truth at a cost and slept better afterward. It's about a deputy who didn't shoot and may never get the credit he deserves for that decision, which is the right kind of mercy anyway. When Anna Ruth took her first steps, she did it toward the water. I didn't stop her. Ayana didn't either. We let the river kiss her ankles and tell her its one sermon in all the languages it bothers to remember. Keep moving, keep making, keep forgiving, keep choosing. We're not safe. No one is. Safety is a story you sell to men who want to nap. But we are here, and here is better than a sign nailed to a tree in a town that claps for the wrong ending. Here's a lodge that smells like smoke and bread and wet hair and a child that will not apologize for breathing. If you've walked this far with us, you know, deserts hold water the way hurt holds love, hidden until it can't be, patient until someone with a knife and a choice shows up and learns where to cut. We made a home where a map said maybe. We keep the door wide in summer and tight in winter. We teach the river our names and it reminds us of theirs. When wind brings news, we listen. When mercy costs, we pay. When paper shouts, we let the water answer. And when the world tells you in red paint not to forgive, we show you what happens when you do, from dusty trails to whispered promises. If this story found you, there are more like it waiting. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for tales where bullets miss but hearts refuse, and where rivers remember.